The Bionic Woman turned a skydiving accident and a government experiment into one of television's most remarkable second chances, premiering on ABC in 1976. The show rebuilt former tennis pro and skydiving instructor Jamie Summers from the ground up with bionic legs, a bionic right arm, and a bionic ear, and asked Lindsay Wagner to carry the weight of a brand new kind of hero on her reconstructed shoulders. Richard Anderson's cool-headed Oscar Goldman guided her through dangerous government missions. Martin E. Brooks's gentle Dr. Rudy Wells kept her systems running, and together they sent Jamie racing into action at speeds no ordinary person could match. Across 3 seasons and 58 episodes, The Bionic Woman proved that a woman could lead an action series, carry it entirely on her own terms, and build an audience loyal enough to survive a network cancellation. Yet behind those iconic slow-motion leaps and the unforgettable bionic sound effect was a story of network decisions, contract limitations, and production secrets that most fans never knew existed. These are 15 shocking facts about The Bionic Woman. Number 1. The death that didn't stick. When Lindsay Wagner first appeared on The $6 Million Man in 1975, her character Jamie Summers was never supposed to survive. The producers wrote her into a 2-part arc with a very clear and deliberate ending. Jamie would fall in love with Steve Austin, suffer a terrible accident during a skydiving jump, and die. Wagner herself believed the role would be her final assignment at Universal Studios before parting ways with the studio altogether. Jamie Summers was designed to be a quiet, unremarkable goodbye. Then the audience responded in a way nobody in that production office had remotely anticipated. Fan mail poured in by the thousands. Not polite notes of appreciation, but urgent, furious, emotionally raw messages from viewers who simply could not accept losing the most compelling character to walk through Steve Austin's life. The letters came in such overwhelming numbers that the producers had no choice but to stop and reconsider. They rewound the clock. Jamie hadn't died after all. The official explanation offered to audiences was that she had been placed in an experimental deep-freeze cryogenic suspension and later revived through a series of additional surgeries. She survived, but survival came at a steep personal cost. The procedure had wiped most of her long-term memories, including every feeling she had ever carried for Steve Austin. The love story that fans had just watched unfold was effectively erased, at least for the time being, and the show was only just getting started. Number 2. Born from $6 million. To truly understand where the Bionic Woman came from, you have to travel back a few years to a novel, a fictional test pilot, and a very large number attached to his name. In 1972, author Martin Kaiden published a science fiction novel called Cyborg, which told the story of a military pilot who survives a catastrophic crash and is painstakingly rebuilt by the government using cutting-edge experimental technology. Universal Studios recognized the potential, bought the rights, developed it into a television movie in 1973, and then expanded it into a full weekly series, The $6 Million Man, starring Lee Majors as Colonel Steve Austin. The show became a genuine cultural hit, and when producer Kenneth Johnson joined the creative team, he immediately pushed for stories that carried more emotional depth, traded some of the pure action for more meaningful human stakes, and asked harder questions about what the bionics actually meant to the person wearing them. Johnson believed firmly that what made the show worth watching was never the technology itself, but rather the deeply human question of what it genuinely felt like to be the person living inside that technology every single day. That belief led him, almost inevitably, to Jamie Summers. When Jamie's staggering and entirely unexpected popularity convinced the studio to bring her back from the dead, Johnson was the loudest voice in the room arguing for giving her a completely separate series of her own. He understood instinctively that she worked best when the show treated her not merely as a superhero with impressive hardware, but as a complete and complicated person navigating an extraordinarily difficult life. The Bionic Woman premiered on January 14, 1976, and within just a few weeks it had assembled an audience large enough to rival and sometimes outright outrate the very show it had spun off from. Number 3. The sound that stopped the world. Before a single stunt was filmed, before a single slow-motion leap played out on screen, before Jamie Summers ever outran a car or tore a reinforced door clean off its hinges, Audiences already knew that something extraordinary was coming. They knew because they heard it first. That unmistakable electronic pulse became one of the most instantly recognized sounds in the entire history of American television. It announced every moment of bionic action with complete authority, and even today, decades removed from the original broadcast, most people who grew up watching the show can reproduce that sound without a moment's hesitation. The effect was crafted by the show's sound design team and used consistently across both the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, giving the two series a shared sonic signature that permanently linked them in the minds of viewers even on nights when they aired separately. The sound fulfilled a very precise storytelling function. Slow-motion photography was the primary visual tool for conveying superhuman speed and strength, and it created a kind of weighted silence that needed to be filled with something meaningful. The bionic sound became the perfect bridge between the ordinary world and the extraordinary one, communicating in a single instant that the normal rules of what a human body could do had just been suspended. What makes it genuinely remarkable from a production standpoint is how thoroughly it worked while costing almost nothing to produce. There were no elaborate visual effects, no digital enhancements, and no expensive post-production tricks involved. There was simply that sound, laid over slow-motion footage, and an audience that believed every single second of what they were watching. Number 4. The backward leap that fooled us. Behind every single moment that made childhood viewers desperately want to be Jamie Summers was a trick so straightforward it borders on beautiful. Those iconic leaps where Jamie soared effortlessly over fences, walls, parked cars, and whatever else the script placed in her path were not remotely what they appeared to be on screen. Stuntwoman Rita Eggleston was the person responsible for making those impossible moments feel real, and her technique was almost laughably uncomplicated. She would climb onto an elevated platform and fall backward off of it. That was the complete extent of the illusion. The camera captured the backward fall, the editors reversed the footage in post-production, slowed it down to approximately 60 frames per second, and the bionic sound effect handled everything else. No wires were rigged to the ceiling. No trampolines were hidden beneath the set. No early computer graphics were employed to smooth out the imperfections. Just a skilled and fearless stuntwoman, a platform of the right height, and an editor with a clear vision of what the reversed footage would become. Knowing the mechanics behind it somehow makes the achievement more impressive rather than less. Number 5. Breaking the rules of prime time. The mid-1970s prime time landscape operated according to a rigid and largely unquestioned set of storytelling rules. The hero of any action series was a man. Women existed in supporting positions, as wives, as girlfriends, as secretaries, or as people whose primary function in the narrative was to be rescued before the closing credits. Even the most capable female characters were typically required to need saving at some point because the formula demanded it. Jamie Summers arrived and dismantled that formula completely. She did not stand at the edge of the action waiting for help. She was the action. She was consistently smarter and faster than every threat placed in front of her. She exercised genuine moral judgment about which orders she was willing to follow, and she maintained personal relationships and a private life that she refused to sacrifice simply because her employer was the government. What distinguished her most sharply from the women sharing television screens with her was the combination of real capability and real emotional depth working simultaneously. She was warm and funny and vulnerable and unstoppable all at once. The Bionic Woman arrived on network television several months before Wonder Woman launched her own prime time series. Jamie Summers was not history's first female hero on screen, but she became the first to stand alone as the unquestioned center of a hit action series for multiple seasons running. The path she cut through prime time led directly to every fierce, fully realized female protagonist who came after her. Number 6. History at the Emmy podium. In 1977, Lindsay Wagner walked to the Emmy podium and collected the award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series, becoming the first performer in the history of the award to win it for a science fiction role. The television awards community of that era had almost no framework for taking genre work seriously as dramatic art. The possibility that the finest lead performance of any given year might originate from a science fiction series was, to most voters and critics, simply outside the boundaries of reasonable consideration. Wagner changed that calculation permanently. Her work as Jamie Summers was never a performance built on spectacle. It was constructed from quieter, more durable materials. The subtle, ongoing portrayal of a woman piecing herself back together after losing not just the use of her limbs but her memories, her relationships, and her sense of continuous identity. She was completely convincing in the action sequences, and equally convincing in the still, small moments when Jamie sat alone trying to recover something she could no longer quite reach. That Emmy win sent a message that the entire industry heard, and that every genre actress working today has benefited from. Number 7. The man who shaped her world. Kenneth Johnson was the producer and writer who determined what kind of show The Bionic Woman was going to be, and the answer he arrived at was far more ambitious and emotionally rigorous than anyone had any reason to expect from a spin-off action series. Rather than simply replicate the $6 million man's formula with a different lead, Johnson committed to genuinely exploring the interior life of the character at the center of it all. His scripts asked uncomfortable and genuinely interesting questions. What does a person owe to the institution that physically rebuilt them? What is lost when a body is reconstructed without the owner's informed consent? Who does Jamie Summers become when the accident, the surgery, and the government missions are stripped away? These questions gave the series a moral and emotional texture that kept it meaningful long after the weekly plots were forgotten. When the show transferred to NBC for its third season and Johnson departed over creative disagreements, the difference in the resulting episodes was immediate and unmistakable. The third season leaned into broader, more outlandish territory and lost much of the emotional seriousness that had made the first 2 seasons genuinely exceptional television. Number 8. A Tale of Two Networks. When ABC canceled The Bionic Woman after its second season despite a 14th-place national ranking and an Emmy on the shelf, the decision stunned everyone connected to the production. The network's programming chief had become fixated on chasing younger demographics and decided the show felt too settled for that pursuit. Cast and crew who had made long-term personal and professional commitments based on reasonable expectations of continued employment were left scrambling. NBC recognized the opening immediately and moved to pick the series up, making it one of the more unusual network-to-network rescues that the television industry had seen to that point. The third season happened entirely because one network was paying attention when another made a short-sighted decision. Number 9. The Fembits Who Haunted an Entire Generation. No element of the series burrowed deeper into the collective childhood memory of its audience than the Fembits, android assassins introduced in the second season who looked and behaved with unsettling precision like ordinary human beings, right up until the moment their faces opened to reveal cold machinery underneath. The response from younger viewers was immediate and intense. NBC received parental complaints by the stack. Some children reportedly became genuinely uncertain about the true nature of adults around them, since the show had established that the difference between a person and a robot was not necessarily visible. The Fembits were frightening precisely because they required no supernatural explanation, just technology taken one step too far. Their eventual reappearance as comedic figures in the Austin Powers franchise decades later confirmed how completely they had embedded themselves in popular culture. Number 10. The Contract That Kept Two Heroes Apart. When the show moved to NBC, Lee Majors and his ABC contract did not travel with it. The network that owned the $6 million man had no intention of lending their lead actor to a competing broadcast, and so the two characters whose relationship had given birth to the entire series were kept apart by legal language rather than storytelling. Oscar Goldman and Dr. Rudy Wells were somehow permitted to move freely between both networks, appearing simultaneously on competing shows as the same characters, while the Bionic Man himself remained contractually stranded on the other side of the dial. Number 11. The Best Bionic Sidekick on 4 Legs. Max the Bionic German Shepherd arrived in the third season carrying a backstory that was more emotionally sophisticated than many human characters received. Rebuilt after a devastating laboratory fire, he suffered from a fear of flames so severe it had begun destabilizing his implants. The government's solution was euthanasia. Jamie's solution was patience. She worked with him until the fear became manageable, and in doing so turned him into her most loyal and capable partner. NBC explored the possibility of a Max spin-off series under the working title The $1 Million Mutt. It never materialized, but the conversation happened, which says a great deal about how thoroughly audiences had adopted him. Number 12. Britain Goes Bionic. The series debuted in the United Kingdom on July 1, 1976, and immediately became the most watched program in the country that week, drawing approximately 14 million viewers. 10 more episodes reached the UK top 20 before the year ended, and The Bionic Woman became the only science fiction series to reach number 1 in British ratings across the entirety of the 20th century, a distinction that neither Doctor Who nor Star Trek ever managed to claim. Number 13. Bigfoot was played by Lurch. The Season 2 crossover event brought Ted Cassidy, universally known as Lurch from the Addams Family, into a fursuit to play the alien-constructed cyborg Bigfoot. The original version of the character, introduced months earlier on The $6 Million Man, had been portrayed by Andre the Giant in one of his earliest acting appearances, at a time when most viewers knew nothing about him beyond the fact that whoever was underneath that costume was genuinely enormous. Number 14. The reboot that forgot what made Jamie special. NBC's 2007 revival cast Michelle Ryan in the lead role and wrapped the character in the kind of relentless, humorless darkness that had worked brilliantly for Battlestar Galactica but proved completely wrong for this particular story. Lindsay Wagner, who had no involvement in the production, observed publicly that the new version was technically accomplished but fundamentally angry, and that anger was precisely what the original had spent 3 seasons refusing to become. The reboot was cancelled after 1 season. Number 15. The Wedding That Took 17 Years. 3 reunion television films produced between 1987 and 1994 gave the story of Jamie Summers and Steve Austin the ending it had always deserved, but never received during the original run. Lindsay Wagner agreed to participate in the final film, Bionic Ever After, on a single non-negotiable condition: the characters had to be married by the time the credits rolled. After 17 years, 2 networks, and more contract disputes than any fan should ever have to endure, Jamie Summers and Steve Austin finally stood together at the end of their story. The audience had been patient enough to wait for it, and the ending was patient enough to honor that wait completely.